We had a couple of SAW teams the city had hired back. We did hire back and has a couple guys working overtime on SAW teams. Those are guys in brush trucks, and all they do is they just carry chainsaws, and they're there to clear roads.
This is Hayne Griffin, a dear friend of mine, regular to the podcast, Firefighter of 16 years, stationed in Black Mountain where he lives and does rescue work in and post-Helene, an area devastated, ravaged by the storm, has been working alongside others in the community, helping folks and contributing to the restoration efforts. Although a very strong dude, Hayne readily admits, and you'll hear in a bit, he'll need to sit down with a therapist to process everything he's seen and experienced up until this point. Now, we knew we'd be talking to him on the podcast, just figured it would be a bit later. We're thankful for his time and loved catching up with our buddy.
When trees fall or to check on trees that have fallen on houses. So it was not unusual for the city to hire back a SAW team. What was unusual was around 6 a.m. when it was getting really bad, dispatch came over the entire department's radio waves and said, all SAW teams return back to station. It is too dangerous. I've never heard that before. There were so many trees falling. All SAW teams need to return back to station and shelter.
I demanded, pleaded, called God on promises and was like, you have to show up or I am done. And he did.
That's something to really think about. What does it mean that the God of the universe loves me?
Are we saying that our God is bigger than their God or what?
Man, you got my mind going crazy right now.
I just think that is evangelical bullshit.
And I don't fit in their box anymore. So feeling rejected from the church makes me feel far away from God.
If I'm living out the love of God, love of the divine, then in some ways we're unoffendable.
It's wrong to marginalize anybody for any reason.
Sometimes we can just have some things about our perspective that's off until we encounter someone who can challenge our thoughts, have conversations with us, and we just continue to grow and evolve.
I'm with you there. Yeah, I like that.
That sounded like womp, 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 womp to Rob.
I'm a hardcore gospel lover. I do love the gospel. I just think we get it wrong.
Girl, I was so highly medicated, I don't even know if you Oh, found my people.
Now, this conversation carried on for 2 hours as we really didn't want to rush a thing. And next episode, dropping soon, we shift gears to talk about prayer, faith, and God in the context of natural disasters, as while we were recording, Milton was making landfall in Florida. And we also talk about the tension between whether or not these hurricanes are natural disasters or just nature. We also talk about a lot of the redemption that is already happening. And my gosh, Hayne found himself in his car listening to old Christian music that he listened to in high school and college, driving him to tears. What in the world? But right now, alongside part of his podcast family, me, Amy, and Stoy, it's Hayne, Firefighter Hayne, and he's got a story to tell. Now, quick note, there's a lot of interest surrounding this one. Lots of people reaching out to me asking when it's going to be released. For those of you who may be new listeners, wanted to warn you that we let people talk how they normally talk, and there's some heavy language in this episode, just in case that's a deal breaker for some. Now, thank you for listening, folks.
Dude, the center of attention. He's kind of, Hayne's not going to like this talk right now, but he's kind of our hero right now. Jed Payne, another host of the show. I love what he said. He said, Hayne has literally been doing the Lord's work. And that's what we're going to get into, because Hayne, who I met through a mutual friend and have become very close to, has been, he's a firefighter for how long, Hayne? How long have you been a firefighter?
16 years.
16 years. And you way up on the totem pole, you can tell a bunch of firefighters, don't go into that building.
That's an order.
Yell out commands. Yeah.
Everybody down.
Nobody in. Yeah, all that stuff.
Shine my boots.
So you live in Black Mountain. That is literally, what would you say? Just a 5-minute drive from Asheville?
10, 15. I mean, it depends on where you're going in the city. But yeah, the east edge of the city, 15 minutes. It takes me about just under 20 to get to my station. So it's a short commute. We're a small little mountain town just east of the city, up the Swannanoa River Valley. So there's a large river called Swannanoa. I wouldn't say large. It got really large. It's a stream. It starts at the top of the valley, which is right at the Continental Divide. And then that river flows west into Asheville. The confluence is with the French Broad River, which is one of the oldest rivers in the world.
Yeah.
I think it's the third oldest river in the world. It flows actually north, and it flows over the mountain range into the Mississippi River, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
And that's part of why they date it that way. So that's kind of important to kind of know that as far as these large rivers, these rivers that are connected to Black Mountain and to Asheville, and they're right and the French is right in the is right in the middle of the city. You cuts the city in two.
And I got to throw this in here real quick because I'll forget otherwise once we really get going. So my parents have been vacationing probably almost 20 years, and we've joined them many times at KOA and Swannanoa. I just found out recently just how close that was to your house. And my mom made sure I realized, that small stream that runs through the campground, that's the Swannanoa River. Yeah. I didn't know that.
It's like 10 feet, 12 feet wide.
Yeah. So that basically totally leveled that KOA campground. You said it was a bunch of silt now? Like it's just all gone?
Oh, it's gone. It's gone.
Y'all, we're talking buildings, stores, cabins, recreational centers. Like we're talking a huge complex, and you're saying it's gone.
Yeah, it's like wiped off the face of the earth at this point.
Hayne, it wasn't until I saw videos of some of the flash flooding that I could even comprehend. All this time, I'm like, I don't understand. Like, how did that happen? We'll get into that in a second. But I want to read the initial text that you sent us. Regular listeners have already heard this before, but I was sharing to Hayne just a second ago that had it not been from a dear friend who I trust and have a relationship with, I would for sure have taken this text as, whoa, exaggerator, maybe even throwing in some lies. But when I read this from Hayne, it knocked me on my butt big time because I knew everything that he said was just absolutely true. He said, hey, everybody. So we're on a text thread, the four of us alongside some other co-hosts of the show. Says, hey, everybody, we're okay. The devastation in Western North Carolina is unfathomable. Officials calling it biblical. It's being called a second Katrina in the mountains. The reported death toll at the time, I think, was 10.
Yeah, that's what they reported.
But you said, I will tell you from working rescues yesterday, our morgues are full and we're stacking bodies in warehouses. I watched multiple people drown as we attempted to rescue them. Yesterday, we were cutting bodies out of trees. Portions of the interstate are gone. Feds are bringing in Chinooks. Is that how you say it?
Chinook, yep.
With supplies and a supply train of semis. We have no water. The main water line to Asheville broke. How's that going, by the way?
No water still. There's some places having it, but the majority of Asheville has zero water.
Good gosh. Our home is good, but the gravel road to hit it is gone. It's half a mile long. I was working when the storm hit, and Erica, who's Hayne's wife, was able to get a text to me. She said the road was collapsing. The fire station let him leave to evacuate them. He was able to drive within a mile of the house. Did you feel like you were in a movie? He had to hike in. They grabbed a large camping backpacks and loaded them with food, batteries, and flashlights, and they headed out to safety. My gosh. And you said that you'll be needing therapy to process all the death and destruction.
Yep.
Hey, and I just want to ask, how are you? Give us as much as you know, because sometimes it's hard to even tell personally how we're doing. How do you think you're doing?
I don't know. That's a great question. I think right now I'm doing well. I've processed a lot of this with, of course, Erica. I've processed it with my fire crew. I've processed it with my sister and brother-in-law. I've processed it with close friends here. My dad some. We even had a mental health specialist who's a friend of mine. He stopped by the station yesterday and just checking in. And I told Scott, our mental health specialist, I said, I think there's just going to be stuff that's just going to kind of surface and arise, come to the surface over time that I'm going to have to deal with. I definitely think I need to sit down and at some point talk to somebody once the dust settles, for sure, just to get stuff unloaded, if anything. Yeah, I definitely have post-traumatic stress, but that's not uncommon. Like post-traumatic stress, you asked me earlier, how many years? 16 years on the job. Every year I carry memories of things that create post-traumatic stress. So PTS is actually normal. It's what lets us know that we're human. As a peer counselor in our department, I tell guys we never want a D to be added to the end of PTS. What we don't want is PTSD, which is that disorder. So when you add a disorder to post-traumatic stress, that's when you get caught in this loop where things get super, super dark and can lead to really, really bad places. So I definitely have some post-traumatic stress, but I'm not a stranger to that and have learned to deal with that over time. So we'll just kind of see how this thing plays out. And as far as myself personally, I think that what has been amazing to me is just seeing already the redemptive values and the redemptive things that are happening in the wake of that storm. There's times that I'll break down and cry. And I was telling Scott, I've told this to Erica, I feel like that maybe, truly, if I had to assign a percentage to it, maybe 10%, 20% is sadness and grief. And about 80 to 90% is just, I'm just so moved by people's generosity and the amount of people that have come in here so selflessly and costing them. It costs these people spending giving thousands of dollars, either with their time or just the supplies that they bring, and just wanting to love on this community. And our community, the Swannanoa River Valley, the eye kind of came over us, and that was a big part of that. But there's communities below us. I mean, Chimney Rock is below us. It's a different county.
Gone.
Chimney Rock's gone. Like, gone. If you just look up before and after photographs of that place. Marshall, North Carolina, gone. Marshall's just north of Asheville, sits on the French Broad. Burnsville's been through incredible amount of destruction. And then these really...
When we were hanging out in Asheville this summer, I told you, I said, man, it just clicked that my kids have seen the mountains, but I haven't shown them all around the stuff that I saw when I was a kid. And I started planning out a trip in my head, like Chimney Rock. We go such and such. We go such and such. I'm like, I cannot believe we were having that conversation. And I want to keep getting into. I want to get into that redemption stuff, but let's back up a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I did not keep up with the news a whole lot heading into the storm. It was more paying attention, aftermath. Did you guys have any predictions or any hint at all that was going to happen? Because my dad explained to me that, part of it was due to the torrential downpours leading up. So everything was already completely drenched. And then he explained to me how a valley is going to fill up with water because it's coming down the mountains. But you guys had no idea this was going to happen. Am I correct?
So we knew that it was going to be a significant event.
Okay.
We didn't know how significant. So there was a large rain cell pre-Helene that came through our area and dumped, I can't remember how many inches of water, but a lot of water. So at that point, the streams are already full. I remember going to work on Thursday and looking at the stream. You've seen them, Joey, just right around our house, looking at the stream and like, man, that thing's full. Like that's holding a lot of water. Because the ground was saturated, the water table had risen. The water table on the ground had risen to the surface at that point. So everything was full. And I also knew that because we have a little rental here in town, and the crawl space flood. Whenever the water table gets high, the crawl space floods. So I knew that the water table is really high. It's just groundwater that comes up into it, which is something I probably need to address and fix in the future when all this is said and done.
I'd say be nice to yourself right now. Don't worry about it.
But so then we had that rain, and then Helene rolls in, and we didn't realize how much it was going to dump. So originally that hurricane, it had weakened, but it was still pretty significant. We had 60, 70 mile an hour gusts, which is a whole nother conversation of the storm to talk about. The amount of tree fall was unreal, even beyond just the rain. But the rain, because the water table had risen, because the streams were flooded, the earth was soft. So when you bring in these high winds, trees are going to start to fall and pop really quick. And then, because the rivers were already just completely at their limit, and then you bring in, don't hold me to the numbers, but 2 more feet of rain, it just creates a catastrophic event. And it's something that we knew. So I'd seen a flood projection map just through my work and the services. They sent us an email and said, this is the flood projection. I remember pulling it up on my phone and looking at the map. I looked at Asheville, looked at my district and said, okay, these areas are likely to flood. So this is what they're projecting. So this is the forecast. Then I went to Black Mountain, which is my home, and I looked at that, and I'm like, oh, it looks like the storm is going to flood here. That makes sense. It was over double what the projection was. So we knew that it was going to be a significant event. We had no idea that we were going to get that much rain. I heard someone, they framed it. They said, we got in 4 days the amount of rain we usually get in 4 months. So we just, that's
So
how
like
much
at
water
what
fell.
point did you kind of realize this is real? Like this is a problem?
When I took off to get home, I think the first time that I actually thought, oh shit, we were in the station. It was so the storm hit Friday morning. That's when it really hit us. Thursday night at 3:30 a.m. I was on duty Thursday, which I work a 24-hour shift. So I start Thursday morning and I go home Friday morning. That'd be my general shift. I went to bed early that night. I remember the guys were watching the Cowboys Giants. I remember that was the game. I'll never forget. Cowboys Giants were playing the night before, Helene. And the guys, we have a big fantasy football thing within the firehouse. So the guys were like, hey, we're going to stay up and watch this game. And I've been around the block enough now in the fire service that I'm like, nah, I'm going to go to bed. Like, I think we may be up tonight with the rain coming in, the storm. Went to bed at 8:30. We woke up at 3:30. The only time we were in between 3:30 and 8, we came in around 5 o'clock, pulled the rig in. We got toned out like 5 minutes later. We pulled the rig in, and I remember hearing a tree fall behind the station. But it was such a big tree, the whole station shook. It was like, boom, and we could feel the station shake under our feet. And I was like, damn, and the wind was picking up. And that's when I thought, I remember thinking this is going to be a doozy. It wasn't until I was driving back to Black Mountain to get to Erica and the kids and I was watching branches, not trees, but branches, I don't know, 6 inches in diameter, blow across the interstate. Trying to get it blowing across the interstate. Yeah.
So these are winds of what right now?
60, 70 gusts at that point.
So maybe Erica calling you, you're like, the road is going? Was that like a surprise? Were you like, what?
I didn't think the road was going at that point. She talked about the extreme amount of water. But when I was driving the interstate, it was raining so hard. I was probably driving 30, 35 miles an hour. I remember one point looking at my speedometer thinking I'm at 30, 35. And then seeing branches blow across the interstate, like, I don't know, 6 to 8 inch branches. And that unnerved me because I thought, oh man, they were dry. They were the way that they were moving with the wind was they were going from my peripheral right to left. That's how the wind was blowing. And I remember thinking, driving, I need to consistently look at my right peripheral vision if a branch is going to be, coming to hit the Jeep. I drive this really old 2001 Jeep Wrangler. Thank goodness I had it that day because it's really what helped get me closer to them. It's not lifted, but it has a higher clearance. So that's when, driving in, I was like, damn, this is an event. And then when I got into Black Mountain to try to access it, that's when I was like, holy shit. Like,
what were you seeing?
Oh, the creeks that were normally the size of, the width of a recliner were 40 feet wide. Trees coming down, bridges completely, like, how bridges have those little caution signs. They're just they're little chevron, black and yellow chevrons that sit before bridges as you can see them. I could just see the tips of the chevrons, cars that had been stalled out and the water was up, midway up the windshield. Watching trees
as a whole, would you say the whole community is being caught off guard as a general statement? Y'all were caught off guard.
I remember when this whole thing was done, talking to family and neighbors, it was never in my wildest imagination. I've known these creeks for so long and I've seen them full. I've seen those small recliner width creeks get bigger, maybe sofa width, I've never seen them the width of a school bus. I've never seen them the width of two school buses, never.
So when did the rescue work start? Like, boom, like you were up all night?
Oh, I was awakened. So 3:30 is when the first tone went off. I went to bed at 8:30 because I was like, I'm going to get as much sleep as I possibly can. And then 3:30, the tones went off. I remember.
What does that mean? The tones? It just means alarms where y'all got to go work? Y'all got to go rescue people?
Yeah. It wasn't a rescue. It was a fire alarm. So the power was flickering. And when power starts to flicker, alarm systems start to trip. They just trip. So I think our first was a fire alarm. And then it was like a tree down, which is common. When we have storms, you have tree down calls. We had a couple of SAW teams that the city had hired back. We did hire back and had a couple guys working overtime on SAW teams. Those are guys in brush trucks, and all they do is they just carry chainsaws, and they're there to clear roads when trees fall or to check on trees that have fallen on houses. So it was not unusual at all. That happens multiple times a year. It was not unusual for the city to hire back a SAL team. What was unusual was around 6 a.m. when it was getting really bad, dispatch came over the entire department's radio waves and said, all SAL teams return back to station. It is too dangerous. I'd never heard that before. There were so many trees falling. All SAL teams need to return back to station and shelter, which I was like, whoa. Like when I remember hearing that, I remember on the rig, of course, we're in a huge truck, but turning to my guys, we wear headsets on the rigs with these microphones so we can talk to one another. When that communication was released and it went citywide, I said to the guys, like, oh shit, like this is bad. Like if they're recalling the SAL teams and telling them get inside because it's so dangerous with all the trees falling, that's a storm I've never experienced before.
Were you worried for your kids and your wife because you weren't there? I mean, I know you went to rescue them, but I mean, like, at what point were you like, my kids, my wife,
It's in the back of my mind, and Erica is incredibly smart and intuitive and wise. My kids sleep in our basement. We sleep up top. Joey knows our house is kind of a split level. You kind of come in at the middle of the house and you can go downstairs or upstairs. Erica and I sleep upstairs. The kids were downstairs. But I knew she was super smart and would make a great choice. I mean, we've been through storms before. We live in the woods, like deep in the woods. So we live about 1.5 miles up in the woods, which is, it's a beautiful spot. It's gorgeous. But there are some big trees. I had removed a bunch of trees a few years ago just out of fear of any tree that could potentially threaten the house. So I wasn't insanely concerned about a tree hitting the house, but when wind starts pushing in a certain direction, even if a tree's leaning another way, it could push the tree back. And so it was entering my mind a couple of times. I'm a compartmentalization person in my mind.
It's probably pretty good for your job, right?
It helps. That can be dangerous. And what I mean by that, just bigger picture, is I can compartmentalize enough where I can stick something so far back that I need to deal with. I just put it so far back, I never deal with it. And then I'm going to have to deal with it, later. But I'm really, really, just generally speaking in my job, very attuned to not pushing things so far back. But what I do in the present moment is I just have an ability to compartmentalize and put things back, knowing and feeling like, Erica's going to make a wise choice. So I remember thinking on the rig, I wasn't thinking about water. I was not thinking about water at all. All I thought was, man, there's a lot of wind right now. There's a lot of trees that are falling. And that concerned me. I thought, oh, wow, like, I really hope a tree doesn't hit the house. And then later that morning when she and I were communicating, I said, get in the basement. Like, you guys need to get in the basement immediately. I'm really afraid of a tree hitting the house and you getting injured or hurt or killed. So please get in the basement with the kids. So she did that. And then there was water coming in the house, which never happens. Just coming up through the basement floor.
So how bad did that get? I didn't know about that.
Not bad. Like, not bad. I mean, some people had
water getting into a house, though. That's still something
coming up through the slab, through the cracks in the slab.
That's damage, right? Like, y'all have to get that fixed, right?
The water table's just never gotten that high before. It's just never happened before. To be completely honest, when this whole thing was said and done, I remember saying to her, I am so proud of our house. Like, there was so much water, so many people's houses, so much. And we just had a very small amount. When I say small amount, maybe an inch max in a couple spots. There was low-lying spots in the basement. For what we went through and the amount of water that fell, I don't think my house will ever flood again, barring another storm like that. So
yeah. So I shudder to ask, but I would want to know more context of cutting people out of trees. Like, I think those are dead people. And then I think the thing that was the toughest for me to hear, and then I heard other accounts, just like the rest of America has heard also, like there was a woman who watched either one or both of her parents and her child be swept out, nothing that she can do. You actually tried to rescue people that drowned?
Yeah, so we're trying to get throwbags. We're trying to get throwbags to people, and you'd see them swept under bridges, and they wouldn't pop out the other side because there were strainers. So strainers would be trees when there's that much water, and the strainers just catch. Imagine like a colander. You're pouring pasta into a colander, and the water comes through, but the colander catches. Well, trees act like a colander under a bridge. So anything large that goes under it, the trees, the branches, the trunk, will just grab whatever's there and it won't release. The water pressure is unbelievable. There's no way you're going to come off of it.
Okay, so under the bridge, the water is high, and
Correct.
then there's a lot of trees and branches and all that debris.
Tons of
so
debris.
the bodies get swept under the bridge and they get caught, and then that's why y'all weren't able to. Okay.
And that's it. They're done. Like they're not going to come up until the water comes down.
All right, and so I have seen the movie called The Impossible. It's based on the 2004 tsunami, and how they depicted it was basically this huge wave that just washed humans and everything in its path. And all you can do is swim with the current and hold on to something and hope something doesn't gash you or that you don't die.
Right.
Is that what happened to people? Like, were people literally in their house and their house gets demolished by the water, and the next thing they know, they're in the water? Galveston, that huge hurricane that hit Texas in the early 1900s, I read a book on it, and somebody literally opened up their front door and their house was in the middle of the ocean and it hadn't fallen yet. Like, how did bodies get swept into the water? Were they walking? Were they in their house? Were they what happened? And I know that some of this sounds really stupid. I just can't wrap my mind around what happened, Hayne.
Sure.
It's hard to fathom.
So just so maybe this is helpful. Maybe your question is there just a tidal wave that just comes barreling through the valley? Is that your question? Because no, it's not a tidal wave.
If I'm sitting here right now, it's and there's tons of flash flooding. It seems like the water would just be rising, and I'd be like, oh wow, I need to run for cover. I can't. In my mind, I can't cross the line of when would my life be threatened? It's just rising.
It's moving, rising water, right?
Everybody's like jealous.
No, but it's moving water, right?
No, it's a good question. But when it's rising a foot every 5 seconds,
every 5 seconds,
good luck. Like, I didn't have a stopwatch on it, Joey. I wasn't holding a stopwatch. But
you're exaggerating, Hayne. I can tell.
That may be an exaggeration.
I don't know if I can trust your text.
What I did see was how quickly it rises. It was, we had a rescue that morning in Biltmore Village, which is the lowest lying area of Asheville. That's in our district. We had some folks drive a car into Biltmore Village and they got trapped. So we had to pull them out. And it wasn't swift water at that point, just getting folks out. But I remember when we entered the water, I remember where the water line was. 2 minutes, we're out of the water, and the water is already 20, 25, this is an exaggeration, 20, 25 feet further out than when we entered 2 minutes before. Is it a tidal wave? No. My understanding was it wasn't a tidal wave. Now, I got to put a caveat to that, an asterisk, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the water's rising so quickly. Let's say that you are in your home, and it's already rising, and it's already widening. So you are on the banks of the Swananoa River, let's say 10 feet off. It's already risen quite a bit, but it may be 6 inches.
Let's pretend like that's a really good thing for me to put my mind to. Let's say I'm at the KOA campground.
Let's say you're at the KOA and you're staying in one of those little cabins.
And that little stream, many a times I've sat in a chair and read a book.
And you've enjoyed the river. So imagine being in your little camp cabins. You're in it. You're like, how guys, we probably should get inside. So you bring the guys inside and you see the water start to rise.
Inside the cabin?
Nope, just outside.
Outside.
But the water's rising outside, but as it's rising, it's also spreading. So it's spreading quickly. I don't mean like 6 inches. I mean 6 feet, 12 feet, 16 feet, 20 feet, 24 feet. So as the water, even though the water's going up, it's also spreading. So you get to a place where you're like, oh, damn, the water is now in. We got to get out of here. The water's in the cabin. It's time for us to go. When you walk out, at that point, the riverbank was maybe 6 feet past your cabin when you first started seeing the water come up. Once it's in your cabin, you walk out, it's 60 feet. It's 60 feet past because it's spread so far and it's rising so quickly. So even though you're trying to haul ass to get out, it's rising so quickly, you just can't cross 60 feet fast enough. And the next thing you know, you're taken away.
It's what happened to tons of people.
That's the basic concept of what happens in those situations.
Were there a lot of people that were in their houses at the time? And I think this is a given, but I just want to be clear. So they're in their houses they're scared out of their minds, and then all of a sudden they don't have their houses anymore, and they're having to figure out, how do I survive? Were there a lot of those sort of people? Are those the sort of people that you were rescuing? Like, who were you rescuing? Were you rescuing partiers who were out walking around treating it like a hurricane party?
I don't
know.
Don't know. Just people. Yes. Don't know. Lots of throwbacks. A lot of people driving their cars. I mean, I'll be honest. I say this all the time. Whenever I see anybody doing something dumb, this is outside of this flood. When I see anybody doing something dumb, and it's a joke in my family, I look at Erica and say, job insurance.
No.
Seriously. I'm like, well, that's what gives me a job.
I mean,
that person is a fucking idiot. That's a really bad idea. But because of that, someone's going to dial 911, maybe them, someone else. So people make horrible decisions. They think, oh, I can drive through this water. I can drive through it. And honestly, I took some risks in my Jeep trying to get to my family. And I get it at some level. At one point, there's 2 points I was driving my Jeep trying to access them, and I was in such deep water. Water was coming into my door, like water was pouring into my floor pan. So
you keep things cool when you're by yourself. Like how are you acting when you're by yourself? Like, were you like calm, keep your composure? Were you like, I could imagine you just being like, I gotta focus. I gotta. No, focus. It was Liam Neeson at Taken sort of thing. Like,
I'm not that cool.
Hayne, I will say this, man. I will say this, man. I've got such a deep level of respect for you, and I think the well of Hayne runs deeper than maybe we can imagine, because you have told me, and you weren't telling me this in a braggy way. You were just giving me a narrative, but you told me some of the horrific things that you've seen in your job over the years. And you just said, that one, most of the guys that showed up with me, they're no longer doing this kind of work. It was too much for them.
That retired a couple of guys.
You have kept going. I'm assuming it's because you're passionate about it. But
passionate about it. I think part of it's compartmentalization, and I think the other part of it is I was raised, and I don't mean this in the contemporary definition of Stoic. I mean in the classical definition of Stoicism. I was raised by two Stoics, like deep Stoics.
That's powerful stuff then, in the classic sense then. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my father and God, it used to drive me mad when I was a kid, but God, I've told him multiple times as an adult, thank you for instilling that inside of me. He would say all the time, whatever happened, he'd be like, make the mental adjustment.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that.
Make the mental adjustment. And there were times that pissed me off as a kid, as a teenager.
I just want to be heard, Dad.
Yeah. But it was his way of just saying, son, it's okay, but turn the page. Pivot and turn the page. So it's something about, I think it's part of, I don't know why, but part of my job. Whenever I go into coming out of this event, just even structure fires, everything slows down for me. I go into a burning building, everything super slows down, and I just get super calm. And I don't know why. There's something about chaos that is at some level calming. So when I was driving, trying to get to the kids, and the water's coming in the Jeep, Erica, right before I left, we were texting because I couldn't get a call out, but we could get text out. And I said, I'm coming home now. And she said, oh, no, don't do that, please. Or she said, please be careful. I don't think you should do that. Or she said, do you think you should do that? That's what she wrote. And I wrote back, yes, it's me. And that's a little self-serving, and I probably should have said that. But
no, man. I had a hero, dude.
I had a confidence that I could get there. It could be okay. And I've been in enough shitty situations and made enough shitty decisions in shitty situations that I felt like, I used to be a raft guide, and I had no clue. I remember pulling up and seeing the roadway completely covered with somewhat fast-moving water, and looking at it like a rapid. I used to be a raft guide, looking at it like a rapid, and I was looking at the water. I was looking for rooster tails. I was looking for discrepancies in the flow. I was looking for anything that I knew the pavement is giving way, because if the pavement's flat, you're going to have a nice, clear, glassy flow of water. But if I saw rooster tails, if I saw places where there's discrepancies in the flow, now in my mind, I was like, well, that means that the pavement's giving away. That means that there's a sinkhole. That means something's popped, creating an irregularity in the flow. So I was trying to look at stuff like that. I was trying to look for landmarks to see how deep stuff was, taking an educated risk to try to get through it.
Were you scared? Would you say I was pretty terrified, but just keeping it together, or you wouldn't say that would match the description? Like fear a factor?
The only fear I had was just that a tree was going to hit my family.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
And
you've been handling. Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Yeah. Just that was my biggest fear, was my family. I wasn't really thinking about my own safety. And I know that I've definitely gotten hairy situations in my lifetime, either as a wilderness guide or as a firefighter. And I've gotten, I guess, lucky. What I've tried to do in those places where I was like, damn, that could have gone really south, is to learn from them and to study them and say, well, what I've done differently, what I've changed. So no, in this situation, honestly, I would have done anything different as far as what I drove through and what I did.
So was it windy and rainy, like when Erica and the kids left with you? Like you were just going through the storm?
It got calm then. So the storm had passed through. That's a good question, Amy. So the storm had passed through at that point. So by the time I got to her, when I entered the woods and was hiking up, I could still hear trees falling. But I was listening and I was watching. I was kind of looking up and then looking down, looking up. But the storm at that point was, I knew that it was passing over us. I knew that we were on the tail end of it. When I got to her, the kids were in our carport and they saw me and screamed. I came out of the upper side of the woods. They were not expecting me to come that way. It's just how I had to get around to them. So again, we live, I mean, Joey can tell you, it is wooded. It is very remote. So I came out of the top and my kids were kind of shocked that I came out of the woods there, and they started yelling, and then Erica came running out and grabbed me. And then it was like, hey, let's get inside. Let's make a plan. We got to figure out what to do next.
Because you're like G.I. Joe.
I'm smiling because your kids had to have been like,
oh,
it's like this heroic fashion.
I don't know about that, but they were happy. I don't know if it was hero, but I think they were just happy to see me.
I'm assuming you have been, this is going to sound like an off the wall question, but have you handled a lot of dead bodies lately? Or is that not part of your job?
No, I have not.
Do you see a lot of dead bodies like in this restoration process?
No, and I've been really fortunate that I haven't been exposed to a whole lot of that. A lot of the guys that I work with they've been, and that's a whole nother, we'll definitely get into this later, but a lot of guys had the option to be, a lot of us were asked to stay mandatorily, and we did. And then some of us were given the option to come back and work on a SAR team. SAR is just an acronym for search and rescue. So SAR teams. I chose not to do that, and I did it intentionally because my community here, because I don't live in the city, I live outside. My community was so devastated. I just felt like they needed us to be here. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do hardly any search and rescue post. Wasn't actually zero. I just showed up and ran calls when I needed to come in, when they needed me to come in, and those calls were unique. We were still fishing dumbasses that were trying to drive through heavy, deep water. Biltmore Village was just absolutely decimated. My rig, we're all swiftwater rescue technicians. Two of us are hazmat techs. I'm a hazmat tech, and one of my most senior guys a hazmat tech. So we rolled in on a dispatch to just assist some people out of the water. I don't know, maybe thigh deep. Yeah. But when we got off the rig, I could hear like this noise was like, you could hear it all around the village. And you could smell mercaptan. Mercaptan is what it's the smell in propane. So natural gas and propane, just straight propane and natural gas doesn't have a smell. It's odorless. But they put a tracer in it called mercaptan that we all know. Oh, that smells like propane. Oh, that smells like natural gas. It's called mercaptan. You can smell mercaptan. So we get off the rig and I tell my two guys, hey, you guys put on the PFDs, the life jackets. Personal flotation device is what PFD stands for. It's just firefighter language. Put on the life vests, put on helmets, go get those folks out of their cars. And then Rob and I got in a full turnout gear, full SCBAs, and we started walking to businesses, turning off gas that had been sheared. Like the tanks had been sheared off just from, there were propane tanks scattered everywhere, even in trees. But they were free flowing. So we went and capped off those propane lines. It had been blowing at that point for 18 hours, 20 hours, and nobody.
So what's the whole cutting people out of trees deal? What was
that?
So
when I said we being the fire department. So we had, I know our district to the east of us, which is on the Swannanoa. and I needed to find people there. Yes, people, plural, but it wasn't, I'm not talking like 50 people. I'm talking 6, 7 people, just bodies that got caught up. And then the trees, some of the trees that stood, there were some trees that were in the water flow that remained. They didn't get uprooted, and those act as strainers. So if a body's coming through the water and catches a limb, it'll just hang up in it. And then when the water recedes, it's stuck. And then it has to be cut out.
Here, it's got to feel kind of weird that right now, all of the nation's attention is not even on Asheville.
Oh, no.
I mean, that's got to feel weird. And I'm not saying that as a knock to anybody. It's human nature. In fact, I'd say our attention is more on Milton because of Helene, but our eyes are on that. And,
as it should be.
And that, and that's what the news is going to be centered around, for the next handful of days. That's just got to kind of feel weird because I bet you feel in some ways still right in the middle of it. I mean, you guys don't even have water. Like, what's the condition in y'all's part of town now? Like, what's going on? What's the process? What's the condition? Are there shelters still housing tons of people? Like, I just have no idea.
Yep.
You can tell I don't watch the news.
Yeah, and neither do I. So I haven't watched hardly any news at all. I just haven't had the ability to. We just haven't had. Internet's been restored in certain places. I'll tell you one thing. Elon Musk is crushing it with Starlink right now in Asheville. I mean, so many people are getting Starlink just so that they can have basically space internet because everything's been severed. Condition right now depends on where you are. So in the city of Asheville, like in the city, at this point, power's been restored. So we do have power back. The infrastructure there is getting back with the power grid. Outside of the city, there's portions that are dark. Swannanoa right now is still completely dark.
Really?
Oh, yeah, like totally dark. And part of that is Swannanoa is not incorporated. And that's been something that's been really interesting about these small communities, because a lot of them in the mountains, and I'll just use Swannanoa as an example. They've, for the last 10 years, every season that they vote on, do we want to incorporate? What does that mean? What does it mean if a community incorporates? What that means is they have public works. It means they have a mayor. It means they have their own police force. It means they have their own fire force. They have multiple people. The only thing Swannanoa has actually is just a fire. They have a county fire station called Swannanoa Fire. That's it. They have no mayor. They have no stormwater. They have no public works department, nothing. So it's much harder for them to bounce back because they just don't have the infrastructure in place. They don't have the resources that are naturally there to get them back online faster. That said, the outpouring of generosity, of labor, of machinery, it's been unbelievable resources that have been poured into Swannanoa, and they got hit the hardest. And there's another reason for that, and that is that our water reservoir, which is called the North Fork Reservoir, the lake is called Lake Burnett. It sits above Black Mountain. Well, that lake feeds the majority of Buncombe County, which is what the city of Asheville's in. So most of Asheville, Swannanoa, Black Mountain, our water comes from the Burnett Reservoir. Well, that's a 36-inch main. That's 3 feet. That's a huge pipe. 36-inch main that is basically running from that reservoir all the way down into Asheville with a bunch of little branches that come off of it to feed water. 150 yards, this I have seen in person, 150 yards of that pipe was completely ripped out of the ground, twisted like a pretzel, and tossed into the woods from the water because they had to release the water to the dam because the dam was in danger of breaking. And that's part of what devastated Swannanoa. We had an unbelievable amount of rain. We've said this, like our creeks, I never in my wildest imagination thought it'd even be possible to see that much water going through our creeks. But then for the North Fork Reservoir to get to a place where there was so much water pressure, so much water coming in, that they had to release the dam. They had to open the dam knowing so right before they released that dam, we have friends here in Black Mountain that are on that river corridor. They were mandatorily evacuated. Like police were coming up and saying, you have got to leave now. We're going to open the dam, knowing this water is going to come from the lake through this small river. It's going to hit the Swannanoa, take a hard right turn going downhill into Asheville and creating incredible destruction to the community of Swannanoa. That's exactly what it did. Just unbelievable. there's a lot of destruction in Black Mountain around the river. Swannanoa looks like a bomb went off when you drive just in that river basin. It's unfathomable. It's unreal.
Can y'all hear
We
me
can
now?
hear you.
Yeah.
Hear you.
Yeah, we got you, Stoy.
We
got you,
Finally!
Stoy.
Oh my goodness!
We can't
Great
see
podcast,
you though, man.
guys. I really enjoyed
Well,
this.
you
We'll see you
won't be
next
able to
time.
see me anyway. I've been trying to comment for like 30 minutes now, and sending Joey text message. I wanted to like interrupt Hayne because I was getting frustrated from not being heard. I was like,
Stoy felt ostracized.
Oh
yeah.
man.
It wasn't intentional, man. It wasn't intentional.
Well, I wanted to ask Hayne, like, you say certain communities are not, what did you basically saying they're not connected to
Right.
have an infrastructure
Yes.
to be able to recover and things like that. Is that a good thing
That's
or
an
a
interesting
bad
question.
thing when you think about the people that they're already adapted to sort of like
Totally.
life off the grid.
Oh, this
So
is such an interesting place we're about to go.
so if I lose a certain amount of things here where I live in the
Right.
city, it's almost a catastrophe, you know? Like they're gonna shut down the city if we can't drive
Right.
on the roads. But when you couldn't drive on the road, you already had your rucksack and all of that ready to, like, it's almost like you're prepared for natural disasters a lot better. I didn't want to minimize what your family and everybody in that community is going
Right.
through, but I was like, man, they're the most prepared for these things to happen.
Yep.
So my question was, how is that a good thing or a bad thing that they're sort of off the grid and don't have an infrastructure to recover from, because they can rebuild their cabin or they can rebuild their whatever it is that they lost in a different type of
Right.
way?
Great question. I have a twofold answer. So, not being in court, I'm actually gonna pick on Swannanoa right now. So if anybody's from Swannanoa listening to this, please forgive me. I remember, so Swannanoa, it's been on their radar, multiple votes. Should we incorporate? Should we not? And most people vote no, because when you incorporate, your taxes go up. That's just the reality. You have to pay extra taxes because you got to pay salaries for public works department. You got to pay salaries for a police force, all their vehicles, all their resources. So taxes go, and that's been the big issue with we don't want to incorporate. And I get that. That's fine. And what was funny to me is that for the last 5 years, there have been little road signs all around Swannanoa that says, "We want sidewalks. We want sidewalks." I'm like, yeah, dumbasses, you got to incorporate first. Like, you're not going to get sidewalks until you incorporate. Sorry. You got to have the money for that. You got to have public works. So sorry, Swannanoa, I got to take a lick at you. I know you're already beat down right now, but I'm going to take one more. I'm going to take a quick, swift kick. That said, I apologize for Swannanoa. That said, it does keep taxes down. And yes, they are in some ways insanely prepared. So I love where this is going because I think this is fascinating. When the water receded and everybody, I kind of talked about it like the storm hit and everybody went in their holes. Like, oh, the storm. And the water recedes, everybody starts to come out, see what's going on. Erica and I were so fortunate because we realized, oh my gosh, we have hardly any property damage. And we just felt like it's time for us to get to work. Sorry, Joey. I've got a certain set of skills. I know how to run a damn chainsaw. Like, there's certain things I know how to do. So we had guys from Asheville, and then I have a lot of friends for Charlotte Fire, and they're like, hey, the Charlotte guys we're coming up. We had multiple guys from Charlotte coming up. We had guys from Asheville that were, told, hey, you guys have worked 72 hours, you worked 96 hours. You've got to take a break. You've worked too hard. You got to come off the rigs. But these guys are badasses. They're like, fuck no, our communities are destroyed. We're not taking a break. You may tell us we can't ride the rig, but we're going to do something. And they knew that the east side, Asheville and east to Ridgecrest, and actually to Old Fort, which is even further than Ridgecrest, that was the most destruction. That's where the eye and the eastern side of the eye, that's the worst part of a storm is just what's east of the eye. That's the most violent part. And that's what got us. So these guys are like, no. So they reached out and like, what do you guys need? And I'm like, I need SALT teams. I made 2 SALT teams. We had so many neighbors. They were trapped. So I have a neighbor she's an invalid. She's wheelchair bound. She can't get out. They were trapped by huge trees. And I'm like, we're putting SALT teams together. We're going to start cutting people out. So we ran chainsaws for 2 days straight and just cutting enough of a hole that cars can get through. But because of the road washout, like a lot of roads up here are gravel. They're not paved. And some of the paved roads completely gave way.
Yeah.
They were undermined by all the water. But the gravel roads, like my road up to the house, it looked like a river, like a whitewater river bed. Because it was a whitewater river for about 12 hours. I couldn't even drive my Jeep up it. My Jeep would have completely bottomed out. It was that rough. But we decided, I was like, okay, I know we can get excavators. I know we can get mini X's. I know we can get skid steers, but we got to create holes. So we just started sawing and sawing and sawing and sawing to create that. What was interesting is that the town of Black Mountain, just in town, what was in the zip code, what was incorporated, Public Works had most of those roads open in 72 hours, 24 hours. 48 hours, because their Public Works team have huge saws. They have got cranes. They were opening all these places. But it was the places outside. Technically, I live in the county. I don't live in the town of Black Mountain. I live outside. Those places don't get those resources. So we were doing everything we could to get people free in those places.
So like when I was in middle school, Charleston went through Hugo, and it was like where we were on James Island, just where my particular neighborhood was, we didn't have power for 3 weeks and it was miserable. So my parents had 5 kids, no power, but we did have water, but you had to boil your water. Like one of the worst things we did. So I'm the middle, so 2 older siblings and 2 younger. So a lot of energy I had was watching the youngers, but the older kids, I remember my 2 sisters having to, like, with my mom, like old school wash laundry, like in the tub, like squeezing it out, and it was cold, and it was like their hands got chapped. It was like horrible just living that way. Like we're just not like 3 weeks with no power is horrible. I just can't imagine. So like, even though it's like that, instead of focusing on your own home and your own like basement and driveway, you just were like, no, I'm going to reach out. And you said that even your kids are helping other people. Like that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, that's my family. And I want to address that. Before I get to that, one thing I do want to say the Stoy brought up is, if that were to happen in the city where he lived. So when my Charlotte guys came up, and these guys are in Charlotte, I mean, and Charlotte's a huge city. I think it's like the 14th biggest city now in the country. It's massive. They were blown away. They expected that they were going to be sawing. We drove. We got in that Jeep. We got in an old Tacoma, and we were in 4-wheel drive just trying to get to places. We would show up, and they were already open, already cut out. If somebody come down the driveway, we're like, "Oh, good, you're free." They're like, "Yeah." I mean, literally, 75% of the people that live up here own a chainsaw, and they're just resilient fucking people. Like, it's unbelievable. And not only are they resilient in that way, but they're just so neighborly. So I cut myself out, and I walked the next holler over, and I cut out my aunt, and I cut out her neighbor. And it's just how it goes. So those first critical hours, the days right after the event, we were doing a lot of work. But once you got 72 hours out of the actual storm being done, most people. Now, not with the excavators. That's a different thing as far as moving dirt to get people out. But as far as the trees, it was opened up. I mean, a lot of it was opened up, and it wasn't a lot of DOT guys. It was just good old boys and good old gals that live in the mountains. They just know how to run a chainsaw, and they just know how to get out. I mean, they were taking static climbing rope and creating 3-to-1 mechanical advantages off with carabiners and webbing, just pulling huge trees out of the way. It's just the ingenuity. And I remember the Charlotte guys were like, dude, these people up here are the most resilient people we've ever seen. Like, if this were Charlotte, we would be cutting out 90% of the people, and 10% would have already been out. We come up here, 90% are already out. Then they did it themselves. 10% are stuck, because the tree's just too damn big to move.
What happened to all those bears that live in your backyard?
Oh, they are.
You don't act like you care.
I do. I can't stand it.
I can't. I can't wait to talk about my observations of the nature after this whole thing, which was just wild.
I just picture bears like going to the air during the hurricane.
Floating down the river.
All right, so Hayne, you mentioned wanting to talk about human nature, the goodness that you've seen, and even talk about fight or flight instincts. You've already kind of covered the human nature, good instincts, and everything, and we got some Stoy Prelo video.
Thank God.
Yes, sir.
We need some color in here.
Yes, sir.
Lord have mercy, getting too washed out.
I was thinking the same thing.
Are too white up in here. Yeah. We need some black.
I was thinking the same thing.
Tell us about those fight or flight instincts. And man, we still got a lot to talk about because I really want to get into God, natural disasters, whether or not we pray, and for these sorts of things. I'm like, this sort of stuff, it's a part of human existence, and that's why I hope in another kingdom, another existence, because maybe in an OCD way, I'll say, Lord, please just send that storm back. But I don't know if I ever really deeply think, and sorry, Christians, where this would maybe sound discouraging, but it just feels like there's no use. Have you ever prayed for a hurricane to go back to sea and it went back to sea? I think my prayers are way more founded in, Lord, be with us. Lord, let your presence shine through this. Let your grace be seen through this. Lord, work good throughout of it. But if I throw a prayer for the ocean, for the hurricane to go back, it's more of an OCD. I don't know if I know God could, just doesn't happen much.
Maybe because people aren't asking.
Do you ever pray for a natural disaster to turn around, like besides a hurricane? What are your other prayers asking for?
My prayers are mainly a communion with God. Right now in this season, it's more of a communion with God, as far as me telling God, asking God, seeking God, and then praying for people that I love. That's kind of my prayers right now.
Yeah, so you don't even give your prayer no power. You don't think if I pray for a natural. Yep. I mean, you keeping it the level of your prayer like very modest.
Yeah.
You know, like you're not praying for a miracle.
Yeah, here's the reality that I'm faced with is there's a lot of people with way more faith than they have a gift of faith. Amy may be somebody with a gift of faith, but they also have a gift of prayer. And I know right as we speak, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of Christians praying for Milton to turn around. In fact, I was a part of a prayer today and I contributed. It was my heart was in it. And I heard somebody that was leading a prayer, praying for the storm to go back. Was there a part of me that thought that Milton, that news was going to flash like, oh my gosh, guys, we've never seen this happen. But Milton has pretty much done a complete 180. It's heading back to the Gulf and it's weakening. That's not in my paradigm of at least something that I've ever experienced as a possibility.
Well, I mean, the prayer is for well-being, right? It's not actually, because that's a part of nature. You can pray that Milton go in a place that's not going to be hit as hard or not. Once it hits a certain land, it starts dying and losing its power anyways.
But there's some people praying for it to not even hit. And I respect that. And like I said, I'll even throw those prayers out too. I'm a weak brother saying, I don't think I have the faith for that.
See, so you shouldn't have been a part of that prayer group, because you took the pizzazz off of their prayer, but because you was in there doubting it. You gotta have faith, man. You gotta have faith. Bring it all.
Just a mustard seed. I think I had a mustard seed.
No, you didn't.
I think I had a mustard seed.
I'm just kidding, man. I'm just kidding. Like, I wanted to ask you, Joey. Though
nothing you're saying I take personally. It's actually when people push against my doubt. I love it. I need that. That
you were saying earlier. This is how long I was trying to speak. You were saying earlier about that, like your human nature. If you see the water gradually coming up, you would be like, okay, I need to get up out of here. When you're out of here is already flooded, where are you going to go? So you can see the water gradually rising, but that means it already rose somewhere else. And if you don't have anywhere to go, what are you going to do? Like panic going to set in at some point. I'm just touching base on all the points that I had while I was muted, blackballed, while I was blackballed in this conversation. So, yeah. And Hayne, one thing you said, you were like, you said, when you see dumb people doing dumb things, and you're like, that's job security and things like that. But I just imagine somebody not having the knowledge when something like that happens. Like, so
Stoy's being pastoral right now. Stoy's being pastoral.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's hard to put somebody in a situation that they don't know. I can't drive my car through this deep water because my car is going to shut off and then I'm gonna be stuck. They don't know these things. They're just panicking. So, and to somebody that's fully savvy and all that, you like, look at this dumb idiot. But it's like,
you
no,
arrogant prick, Hayne. You arrogant prick.
Yeah, that person is really naive. Like they're doing the best that they can.
Well,
they're doing the best that they can in that situation.
And I would just go ahead and say this to every listener or watcher watching this. Don't drive in the water if you can't see the fucking lines on the road. That's not a good idea. I think you should be able to see. I think you should be able to see the lines in the road. It's not a great choice.
Yeah.
Stoy, I'm gonna ask that you give our brother a little bit of emotional margin and just let him call people stupid right now. I think he's earned that right. All right.
Let me say this.
That's why.
No, Hayne want me. Hayne want me to be a part of this conversation.
I want the pushback.
I do too, man.
Hayne, does your state not have the thing "Don't drown, turn around"? South Carolina has that slogan. You don't have that.
This has never happened. I mean, that's a great slogan if you live on the coast. But it's never happened. Let me say this though, and I want to be clear in that as far as the people that drowned, I would say the majority of the bodies have been found at this point. The people that were in those communities, they didn't drown because they made a bad choice. They drowned because they were poor, and because they lived in floodplains, because that's all they could afford.
Ooh.
Now, see, that's a whole nother conversation.
Whole nother conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Wow. Yeah. You texted me that one thing you want to talk about is the goodness you've seen, and even talk about the fight or flight instincts.
The aftermath of it. I'll just tell my story. So you guys know that we put I put 2 SALT teams together, cutting people out, and Erica and the kids immediately we had a conversation. So like every evening. The last maybe the 3 or 4 evenings after it all had ended, we would check in with the kids. How are you doing? Where are you at? Where's your mind? How are you feeling? Just to see where they were at, because even though I was being a hard charger and Eric was ready to be a hard charger, we didn't want to charge them into something that they weren't emotionally ready for. So we would check in with them and say, hey, where are you guys at? Do you need to get out of here? We can get you out of here if we need to. At the time, all we had was my Jeep and half a tank of gas. And that was it. And I remember thinking, I got to figure out how to do this gas thing. Because at that point, there was a mass exodus out of Western North Carolina. And the only place they could go was South Carolina. Because 40 was shut down on both sides. The gorge between Asheville and Knoxville was washed out. 26 from Asheville to Johnson City, Tennessee, washed out. I mean, the interstate fell into the Nolechucky River, and the landslides from Ridgecrest all the way down to Marion, North Carolina, which would be 40, that section of 40, there were mudslides. So the only way to get in and out was you could only come from 26, which would be from Greenville-Spartanburg. Of course, that shoots all the way to Charleston, but Greenville-Spartanburg out. So I knew that was the only way out. But we told the children, if we need to get out of here for you guys, we will. And they wanted to stay, I think. And it was interesting watching both of my kids. My daughter wanted to stay. She wanted to help. So did my son. But it really disturbed him. I think it still disturbs him. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in the future with both of them, but definitely with him. But yeah, we would check in with them and say, hey, do you guys want to stick around here? Do you want to stay? Do you need a break? And they were like, no, we want to help. So they volunteered. Every day they would go to had a local church that was distributing water, was distributing all these goods to people. And they were involved in that distribution process. Both of my kids were really concerned, like, their friends, they didn't know where their friends were. Some of them they were able to connect with. The cell phone, the whole infrastructure just shut down. Like, it was unreal. And I didn't realize how important water was. You know, you think, oh, it sucks, my power's out. Boy, I'd rather have my power out and have water than have my power and not have water. Like, water is such a huge part.
Well, I want to give you a round of applause, Hayne, for your kids, man. Like I told you in the text, like, for them to have that mentality to think of others like that says a lot about you and your wife and y'all.
Thank you, Stoy.
So that was a big deal. That stood out to me among everything else. I was like, man, if his kids are thinking like that, they got a certain base that nobody is very your foundation is strong. So I wanted to commend you for that and give you and your wife a round of applause for raising some great kids.
That's true.
I really appreciate that. Thanks for saying that.
Amen.
And we learned today, my kids learned today that not a single student from their middle school and high school was killed. And that was a huge,
that's good.
They learned that
all
today?
The students were accounted for. That was a huge weight off their shoulders to learn that. Because even though they're close friends, they finally got connected with, were all accounted for. They just felt like, I'm going to show back up to school. There's going to be empty desks. There's going to be people that drown. And every single one's accounted for, which is wonderful. So,
Amy, let me ask you, and then I definitely want to hear Hayne's reflection on my OE of Little Faith comments just a second ago. But would you be someone that would pray for a storm to turn around?
To be continued.